It was the kind of sound that splits the world in half. A sharp, desperate cry that ripped through the quiet afternoon like glass shattering against stone. I froze where I stood, pruning shears slipping from my hands, the metal clattering against the patio stones. My heart stuttered, then slammed into overdrive, pounding so hard it blurred my vision. I knew that sound. It was my daughter, I didn't think. My body just moved. Legs pumping, lungs burning, I tore across the yard toward the woods that bordered the property. Branches whipped against my arms, sunlight flickered through the canopy, but none of it mattered. All that mattered was the raw terror in that scream and the way my gut told me something unthinkable was waiting just ahead, and then I saw it. My daughter, Lily, just 11 years old, was tied to a tree with coarse yellow rope. Her small arms wrenched behind her, her ankles knotted so tight she couldn't move. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, her cheeks blotchy from crying. She looked at me with eyes so wide and full of panic it nearly broke me in half. She whimpered through the gag in her mouth, a muffled plea that cut deeper than any knife. And standing a few feet away, clutching the other end of the rope like some kind of twisted prize, was Karen's son, Ryan. A teenager, older, taller, stronger than Lily. His expression was one of smug triumph. Lips curled into a sneer, his posture loose with arrogance. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't afraid. He was proud of what he'd done. The world tilted. For a second I couldn't breathe. Heat roared up my chest, a fire I could barely contain. Every muscle in me screamed to rip him away from her, to break every bone in his body, but Lily's sobs anchored me. She needed me steady, not reckless. I rushed forward, hands clawing at the knots, rope digging into my palms as I tore it free. The fibers had bitten into her wrists, leaving angry red welts that made my stomach churn. My hands trembled with rage as I worked, jaw clenched so tight it ached. Lily buried her face against me the moment she was free, her body shaking with the kind of fear no child should ever know. I held her close, whispering promises through gritted teeth, swearing she was safe now, swearing I'd never let this happen again. But Ryan wasn't done. He leaned back against the tree, arms crossed, grinning like he'd won. "Call your dad," he spat, the words laced with cruel delight. "Go on, call him. Let's see what he does." He tugged at the loose rope like it was nothing but a game, like he hadn't just assaulted a child. His voice dripped with the kind of arrogance only a boy raised on unchecked entitlement could muster. My blood boiled. My vision tunneled. Every instinct screamed to lunge at him, to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. But before I could take a step, he darted backward, eyes flashing with the same smug defiance his mother wore every time she came after us. He laughed, the sound sharp and mocking, and shouted across the yard as he sprinted away. "My mom runs the HOA. You can't touch me." By the time I carried Lily back into the house, my wife was waiting, pale and frantic, her own tears spilling as she pressed ice against our daughter's wrists. She whispered comfort through broken sobs, rocking her like she was a baby again. Lily clung to her, still trembling, still too shaken to speak. I paced the kitchen like a caged animal, fury gnawing at my ribs. But under the rage sat something colder, fear, because I knew Karen. We all did. She wasn't just another neighbor with too much time on her hands. She was the tyrant of this community, a woman who wielded her HOA power like a weapon, who buried families under fines, lawsuits, and threats until they either moved away or bowed to her. But this wasn't about grass height or fence colors. This wasn't about late-night parking complaints or property lines. This was her son tying my daughter to a tree, and her fingerprints were all over it. Because boys like Ryan don't learn cruelty alone. They're taught it, fed it, nurtured by parents who tell them they can do whatever they want, that rules are for everyone else. And I knew, even before the sun set that evening, that Karen would laugh it off. That she'd wave her hand and call it a prank. That she'd look me in the eye and dare me to make noise about it. All while promising to bury me under paperwork and humiliation if I tried. But as I stood there, watching my wife rock our daughter back and forth, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about an HOA dispute anymore. This was war, and I didn't yet know it, but help was already on its way. Help with a past so heavy, so dangerous, that even Karen's empire of intimidation would crumble when it arrived. The night after it happened, sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lily strapped to that tree, rope biting into her wrists, tears staining her cheeks. Her little body trembled even as she slept, curled between us on the bed, her fists still clenched tight, like she was holding on for dear life. My wife lay awake beside her, whispering prayers through silent tears, but I could feel her fear just as sharp as my own. By morning, the fear had hardened into something else. Anger, a kind of rage that lived deep in the bones, that pulsed with every heartbeat until it became impossible to ignore. I stormed across the street, fists tight, breath coming fast, and pounded on Karen's front door. She answered in her pressed blazer, her blonde bob perfectly in place, arms crossed like she'd been waiting for me. That smug smile spread across her face, the one she used whenever she knew she had the upper hand. I demanded to know what Ryan thought he was doing. My voice cracked from fury, but I didn't care. I told her how I found Lily tied like an animal, how she cried herself hoarse, how those rope marks would scar her wrists for days. Karen didn't flinch. She didn't even look surprised. She just shrugged, her tone dripping with disdain, and told me, "Boys will be boys." Maybe Lily needed to learn a little respect. The words landed like poison. My vision went red. I shouted that her son had assaulted my daughter, that this was no prank, that this was sick. But she leaned closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. Her eyes glittered with malice. "Push this any further and I'll bury you," she hissed. "Fines, lawsuits, complaints. You think anyone will side with you over me? Go ahead, try." The door slammed in my face before I could answer. The sound echoed down the street, final, smug, victorious. I stood there, shaking with rage, but under it all was the gnawing truth. I knew she meant every word. Karen had the board in her pocket, the sheriff on speed dial, and enough neighbors scared of her wrath that no one would dare back me. Back home, I felt helpless. My wife begged me to call the authorities, but the image of Karen's smirk replayed in my head. She'd spin it, twist it, make me out to be the aggressor. That was her power, turning her cruelty into our shame. Lily barely left her room that day. She sat by the window, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes fixed on the tree line. Every sound outside made her flinch. That evening, when I checked on her, I found her holding the phone. She was whispering into it, her voice trembling. I almost scolded her for using it so late, but then I heard what she was saying. She was talking to her grandfather. My wife's father. I'd forgotten how close they were, how much she adored him. She told him everything, her words broken by sobs but steady enough to carry the truth. She told him about the rope, about Ryan's sneer, about Karen's threats. She whispered that she was scared to go outside, scared he'd come back. On the other end of the line, there was silence. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd lost him. And then his voice came through, gravelly and calm, like steel dragged over stone. "Don't you worry, sweetheart," he said. "Grandpa's coming." When Lily hung up, she looked at me with a small, hopeful smile, the first I'd seen since it happened. She believed him, and in her eyes, for the first time since yesterday, I saw a flicker of safety. I didn't know then what that call would unleash. Most of the neighbors only knew him as a quiet man who lived 3 states away, a widower who sent Lily birthday cards and visited on holidays. What they didn't know, what even Karen didn't know, was that before he was Grandpa, before he was the old man with kind eyes, he was something else entirely. He was Delta, Special Operations, a man trained to move in shadows, to stare down monsters, to fight battles no ordinary soldier could fight. He had walked through fire, and he had walked out the other side harder than iron, and now he was coming for his granddaughter. 2 days later, a black pickup rolled into our driveway just after dawn. The engine cut, the door opened, and there he was. Broad shoulders, silver hair cropped close, boots that still carried desert dust from another lifetime. My father-in-law didn't look like a retiree. He looked like a soldier between missions. Lily bolted from the porch the moment she saw him. He scooped her up with one arm, kissed her forehead, and whispered something only she could hear. She melted into his chest like the world had finally stopped shaking. That same morning, Karen strutted past our yard with her coffee mug, throwing me her usual smirk. But when her eyes landed on him, her step faltered. He stood tall, arms crossed, gaze locked on her with a stillness that felt dangerous. For the first time, I saw her mask slip. Just a flicker. But it was enough. That evening, Grandpa asked me to walk him through everything. I told him about the ropes, about Ryan's cruelty, about Karen's threats. I expected him to explode, to rage like I had. But he just listened, stone-faced, his jaw set tight. When I finished, he stood, clapped a hand on my shoulder and said, "This ends now." The next day, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting. She wanted to address escalating tensions in the neighborhood. We knew what that meant. She was going to bury us with her rules, her fines, her lies. But when we walked into that clubhouse, Grandpa walked with us. He didn't sit. He didn't speak right away. He just stood at the back of the room watching. His presence filled the space like a storm cloud rolling in. When Karen began her speech, twisting the story as she always did, Grandpa finally stepped forward. His voice was calm, steady, but it cut through the room like a blade. He laid out every detail of what Ryan had done, every word Karen had threatened me with, every bruise Lily still carried on her wrists. He didn't raise his voice, but every person in that room leaned forward, listening. Then he pulled something from his jacket pocket, a flash drive. He placed it on the table in front of Karen. "I suggest," he said, his voice low, "you stop before I play what's on here." The color drained from her face. She knew. Cameras she hadn't noticed, recordings she hadn't considered. Proof she couldn't spin. For once, Karen had nothing to say. The board shifted uncomfortably. Neighbors who had always cowered under her glare now looked at her with doubt, even disgust. In that silence, her power cracked. Karen stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Ryan followed, eyes down, no smirk this time. When the dust settled, Grandpa finally sat, exhaling like the battle was won. He wasn't gloating, he wasn't smiling. He just leaned down to Lily and whispered, "No one will ever hurt you again, sweetheart." And she believed him. So did I. That night, for the first time in weeks, Lily slept soundly. And as I stood in the doorway, watching her curled up with her stuffed rabbit, I realized something. Sometimes monsters don't get beaten in courtrooms or meetings. Sometimes they get beaten by someone who refuses to let fear rule the room. Karen never came near us again, and our neighborhood, once ruled by her smirk, now belonged to the people who finally saw her for what she was. But the image that stayed with me wasn't her downfall. It was Lily's smile, soft and safe in her grandfather's arms, because in that moment, she knew what it felt like to be truly protected.